Hi guys, this is Seth Christensen with the Got Any Cows podcast. 20 years ago, I was an 11-year-old kid with 2 bucket calves. Today, we have sent genetics from our company to 40 of the 50 states and 12 countries around the world. I still learn more every day, and I invite you to learn along with me. Hey guys, this is Seth Christensen with the Got Any Cows podcast, and I appreciate you guys being here today. We've just wrapped up recording an awesome episode with Greg Bingham. The man's a wealth of knowledge. Really appreciate him taking the time to come and record with us. I will apologize to you on the audio. It's February. Normally we wouldn't even try to record outside, but man, it was nice today. Like, it was warm. I mean, we were up 40, more towards 50 degrees on the south side of the house. I mean, it was just cozy. It felt so good to be outside. So I thought, you know what we're going to do? We're going to record this outside, record it in our typical spot where, you've got the mountains and it's a pretty shot and it's a nice spot to record. Thought, yeah, this is what we're going to do. And then lo and behold, poor Greg shows up, graciously gives me an hour of his time. And we no sooner than get set up and everything ready and the equipment put together, start to record, then the wind picks up. And I mean, it was nasty. Like, really cold. I mean, the wind came out of the north and I just felt so bad because, like I said, here's my friend and my neighbor that's done so much to help me already, answering all these questions I've asked him in the past, and then is here to record a podcast episode. And I'm like, hey, yeah, let's record it on the deck in February in Idaho. And surprise, surprise, it ended up being really cold, but I'm recording just a quick, intro and or apology here just to say I apologize. You are going to hear the wind in that episode. You are going to hear, things flapping around and whatever. I'm sorry. We'll clean out all of what we can. Jacob will work his magic. Appreciate you guys being here and listening. It means a lot. Grateful for all the people that support us and support this business and take the time to listen. And I've been really fortunate to learn from a lot of great people, Greg being one of them, and I'm excited to pass that on to you. And so without further ado, here is my episode with Greg Bingham. Well, I am Seth Christensen. We're here for another episode of the Got Any Cows podcast. I have my good friend and neighbor, Greg Bingham, with us here today. And Greg is my go-to guy. Whenever I have questions as it relates to pasture, Greg's the guy I call. You can see down below us here a lot of brown, and that's Seth level expertise on how to go about making a pasture. If you drive past any of Greg's pastures, they are immaculate, which is even more impressive given the fact that Greg is engaged in organic dairy farming and so has a different set of tools available to him in that practice. And so anyway, I'll let Greg introduce himself so that I don't butcher any of the details, but if you can fill us in, Greg, on who you are and what you do, and give us a little bit of a feel for who we're talking to today.
Sure. Thanks, Seth. Appreciate the opportunity. So first off, I'm a 4th generation farmer. I farm with my brothers, Dale and Gary. And it's just down the road. My great grandfather started I guess you call it the home operation back in 1911. Wow. And it's just right up the street here on Linrose. And he was just, he came with his wife, and he was actually a school teacher in Preston. He came over for the summers and they dry farmed. And through that home farm, he helped, he was very successful, by the way. And through that farming, he was very successful, and he helped his sons to get their own farms. And so my grandfather, Dean, he helped him start this farm just right down the road from us.
Okay.
And so that's where my dad, grew up, and then subsequently that's where I grew up.
Okay.
And so we started, I was with my dad for 10 years before I took over the operation. And then when I was with my dad, we purchased back the original, his name is H.R. Bingham. We purchased the original home place.
Okay.
And so brought that back into the operation. And so right at about the same time that I was taking over from my dad, that's when my wife and we decided to go organic. Okay. And that's how that transition started.
Gotcha.
So
awesome. So at this point in time, everything you do is organic, all of your crops, all of your milk, everything else?
Yeah, we are 100% organic. We ship to Organic Valley. We've been doing that since day one. We started back in the transition period back in 2006, started shipping milk November of 2007. and obviously everything has its bumps along the way, but it's been great. It's been a great livelihood for us, and we've fully embraced the organic way of life, and we've just we've been somewhat successful at it and enjoy it.
Absolutely. Well, and like I mentioned, to see the level you guys farm at without the use of some of the tools that are prohibited within organic production practices is downright impressive. I mean, there are other farms that have the whole toolbox available to them, including mine, that aren't near as sharp as as yours is in an organic production setting. So for people that might not know, walk us through what organic means. What's the difference between being an organic dairy farmer and a conventional dairy farmer?
Okay, well, essentially, the difference is we are not allowed to use any synthetic fertilizers, chemicals, pesticides. For cows, we can't use any hormones, antibiotics, as general practice. Now, of course, if an animal gets sick and we can't get it well through organic treatments, then of course they don't want to let the animal suffer, and we don't want to let the animal suffer as well. So we will then treat an animal with antibiotics, get it better. But the difference is once we treat that animal, we can't, like if we're milking her, for example, there's not a transition period back into the organic string. We have to sell that animal, get it off of our place. Yeah. And same with land. We have to be, in order to transition land to organic, we have to be 3 years free of any chemical substance whatsoever. And so once we get through that transition phase, then we're considered organic, and the animals have to eat 100% organic diet. It has to be certified organic through certifying agencies. There's various agencies throughout the country. But yeah, everything has to be certified. There's yearly audits on us, and we just have to go through the process and to ensure that everybody abides by the same rules.
Right. So for you, as you made that decision to transition to organic, walk me through some of your motivation as to why. What made you decide it was worth the challenge of shifting to organic farming, and then I guess lessons learned along the way in that transition, and or just in your business at large as your business has developed, lessons learned and or maybe pitfalls that you ran into or roadblocks.
Well, the reason why I even looked at it was one day, it must have been late 05 or it was probably in 05. I got a postcard in the mail. And at this point in time, we were still conventionally farming. That's all I really knew. But there's a postcard that came in the mail from Organic Valley, and it just sent something to the fact of, come down and get a free meal and learn more, or how you can become more profitable, dairying the organic way. So I did it. I just went by myself, and I was very intrigued with everything they talked about. They shared many different things. How to do it. They talked about pay price. Of course, I'll be honest. The first thing that I thought of was pay price. Sure. Hey, because being 10 years with my dad and even growing up on the farm, life was not easy. There was a lot of financial struggles.
Mm-hmm. Farming's hard.
It's really hard, and so I'd seen all of that, and of course my wife wasn't. I guess she wasn't too on board with me being a farmer and the struggles you have to go through. Because wives experience it; they're right there with their husbands.
Absolutely.
So I came home and told her everything that I learned, and she's just like, "Hey, this is interesting." And if it wasn't for these representatives that stopped by my place the very next day, I mean, they followed up, and they came to the farm, and they talked to. Well, my dad was there, and they talked to us, and if they wouldn't have done that, then probably nothing would have happened with it. But anyway, long story short, they came, we talked, piqued more interest, and then from there it just kind of grew, blossomed, and they kept sharing information, and we kept back and forth until we were signed up and on board, and we went through the transition process. You talked about life lessons or lessons learned. It's hard work. It's really hard work. I mean, instead of go out and spraying your fields, either you got to get out a shovel, or you got a mechanical weed with your tractors. You're cultivating with your tractors. everything's just takes a little bit longer, more time, and it's just a little bit more to it. But I'd say the trade-offs are just, I feel the trade-offs are worth it. I'm very happy with how things have turned out, but it is a lot of work. It's a lot of work, and you have to buy into that to make it successful.
Right. And I see a lot of the same, Greg, in what we do with registered cattle, where again, it'd be something kind of a branded or a specialty product outside of just commodity beef. It's just a lot more work. In a commodity beef production scenario, the average guy would say, we're just going to turn out a bull and we're going to breed the cows and we're going to make the calves. They're going to leave on a truck in the fall, and that's the process. But for us in registered cattle, we're spending all winter long here as a fall calving program. We're transferring embryos all day, every day. We're dealing with checking heats and running sync protocols and managing embryo transfer and artificial insemination. And when those calves get here, even though they are really well bred, they're not magically worth a pile then either. We have to go ahead and get them registered. We have to promote them well. We have to communicate with people. Even this podcast is a part of helping clients, the people that I work with, to be able to then make best use of the genetics they've purchased from us here and recognize the value or realize the value. So like you say, even though you were able to receive better pay for producing a premium product, you have to do what it takes to produce that, and you've been willing to go through those challenges or produce using inside of those constraints to be able to receive that premium price. So one of the differences in organic dairying would be access to pasture. Walk us through what that means relative to conventional dairy production, as far as what they need to have for access to pasture.
Yeah, good question. So conventional, we didn't pasture our animals. Now, we did the summertime with our dry cows and our heifers because we had pasture available. Yep. With the dairy cows, it's a requirement that 30% of their feed for 4 months out of the year comes through pasture. So the first thing that we did, and that's the other thing is with organic dairying, it's not going to work for everybody because not everyone has ground accessible to their dairy, to their parlor. And you don't want to you don't want to walk your cows miles. You can't do that. Right. So luckily we have ground just right directly behind our farm and right to the side of our farm. So that's the first step we did is we started making pastures. Yeah. And so through that, each year it seemed like we would expand, 10, 20 acres for each year. We found out that our cows liked it. Number one, they did well in the summer months. And then we've just continued to grow. Our animal numbers have grown, as well as the pasture numbers.
Right. Yep. So when it comes to establishing a pasture, and this is one of those things that, like I mentioned, I'm still learning right there with anybody as far as how do you even go about all of this. And so people will call me and ask, so how do I go about establishing this pasture? I'm like, hold on a minute, I'll call Greg. And see if we can figure this out. But it is a learning process, and I've been working with you on what we've been working on here specifically. But walk me through for the different pieces that you have turned into pasture. I mean, it's such a broad definition. Someone could say pasture means really any kind of grass. Technically anything could be a quote unquote pasture. But what does it mean for you, Greg, to take a piece of property that you've deemed, hey, we're going to use this for pasture production, we're going to use this for forage. What does it look like to turn it from bare dirt or another crop or weeds or whatever it may be to a productive pasture? What does that look like?
Well, first off, let me just state this, that even though you're giving me some pretty good compliments, I don't feel like I'm an expert. I just feel like we try our best, and some things work out and sometimes they don't. But to answer your question, when we first started, we just went out and literally we tilled our ground just like normal, just like we would for planting, grains, small grains. Tilled it, we got a level seed bed, and we packed it, and then we took the drill and we put some pasture grass seed. We didn't even know what we were doing. We just took some. I knew we needed a legume, because we can't have fertilizer anymore, and that's a nitrogen fixing plant. And we just put some grasses in. I really didn't even know what they were. So that was our first experiment with pastures. Since then, we have come up with, we usually put about at least 6 different varieties in. We usually put 2 legumes. We put, well, 2 to 3, I should say. We put in bird's foot trefoil. We put in white clover, sometimes some red clover, and then we use different kind of grasses. Either some fescues, we use some perennial rye, we use orchard grass, timothy, that type of thing. But we try to come up with just a whole assortment, kind of like when you go to the salad bar. You want many different options. At least I do. And so when I was learning about this, we had some organic guys that just say, "Hey, your cows are just like us. They want options." Yeah. And then at the same time, you have grasses that will grow better in the cool seasons, versus in the summertime you have grasses that do better in the heat. And those cool season grasses kind of shut down, and then the fall will kind of come back a little bit. But so you want a lot of variety. But going back to how you do it, you just need to have, at least what we do is we till our ground just like normal. We want a level flat surface, and then we pack it. You got to have good soil to seed contact.
Yeah.
And we have done 2 different methods. We've used just a regular drill where it slices open the earth, and and then you have the packer wheels behind it. We've tried that. And we had success with it and it worked, but for the last several years we've used a brilliant seeder. And what that is basically it just drops the seed on top of the ground, and then you have a big packer wheel that comes behind it and pushes the seed into the soil, which gives you that
That
contact that you need.
Okay. Yeah.
But I will say that I feel that the most important thing with establishing pasture grass is that you have to keep it wet. That first, during the germination period and that initial stage, you have to keep it wet. If you, like, for example, the wind just started picking up,
Right.
and if you're in the spring or even late fall, and all of a sudden you go across your pivot and you have a hot, windy day, I mean, you could lose it all in just a couple of days, just by the weather, and it's no fault of your own. You might have done everything 100% right, but then you just have some weird freak, wind come along, and you can't keep it wet, and boom, there she goes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So when you're selecting even timing, how do you go about the timing of establishing pasture? Have you done it at all sorts of different times of year, or do you have one season you prefer? How do you go about the timing of when to even start the process?
Well, when we first started out, we were told that spring's probably the best. But then I've watched other guys, and they've tried late fall, or I shouldn't say late fall, but late summer. And so we've tried them both, and we've had success with both. What we've never tried middle of the summer, because I think you're just asking for it there, because you get 90, 95 degree days plus a wind, and you literally can't keep it wet.
Right.
So we've tried the spring will work. The key is you don't want to have it too wet, because you got to be able to get out and work your ground, and you don't want to create clods. If you're out working the ground and it's coming up, in clods, and it's not breaking apart, then you're already behind the wheel, because you can't break those clods down. And even if you do break them down, they're going to be bigger, clods, and then you're not going to have contact with that seed.
Okay. Yeah.
So you want a nice loamy soil.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. Yeah. So, like on our piece here, we ended up deciding it was in native grasses previously, and kind of dry land type grasses that didn't necessarily really respond to irrigation. So then once we developed irrigation, we thought it doesn't make much sense to get something wet that doesn't do anything with it. So we wanted to go to irrigated varieties. Now, between then and now, we initially took out the native grasses, and we ended up doing a year of triticale. Walk us through why we did that. Why would that be a desirable approach, to do a small grain of some kind for a year or even two between a prior pasture and then go into an improved pasture?
The biggest thing we were looking for, I felt, was that you dug it out. You had dug it out already.
Yep.
And so there was kind of big chunks.
Yes.
You had these big root balls that you had.
A mess down there.
And so what we were trying to accomplish by growing that triticale was we were trying to get rid of the root balls, get rid of the old debris. Because if you have a bunch of debris in your field and it's not level, like remember I said, we like to have things just level.
Right.
Yeah. If you have things level, then it just helps support that new seeding.
Yeah.
And so by going a year and possibly even 2 years, by growing another crop, that's just allowing that material to break down, and so we don't have to fight it.
Right.
And so, because again, the key to pastures is if you can get that first seeding to get established, you're just ahead of the game.
Right.
But if you have to come back and reseed, then you're just fighting. You're fighting just a lot of different factors.
Yeah. Yeah.
It makes it tough.
Right. And that was one of the things that we ran into with this one here is we took out that native grass, and then you guys brought in. I guess walk me through what the implements were that you brought in to break up, because we had initially we did everything that we did for our part on my end of things. We did wrong, and so you were coming in batting cleanup for me. So we had run a ripper through it with the thought being in a crop application that could level and or smooth the ground. In an established pasture application where this had deep roots and hadn't been monkeyed with in I don't know how long, it made a mess. And we were rolling big strips of sod and things like that. So when you guys came in, you sent Dale over and he worked it with a couple of different implements, and I don't even know what they were. Do you know what kind of implements were used to take it from the mess it was to as smooth as you had it prior to that triticale seeding?
Yeah, the first one was we had a high-speed disc. It's called a joker, but it's essentially the same. The new term is a high-speed disc, and it's basically a disc that you can go really fast on, and then it's got packer wheels behind. But the concept behind it is that it will help cover and distribute the big chunks, and debris, I should say. Sure. It'll bury the debris so it's not on top anymore. Yeah. And so you still have a small percentage that's on top, but it does do a very good job of burying stuff.
Right.
So that's what he brought in first. And I think he even brought in a disc because you had some areas that were pretty bad, and I think he brought in the big disc to help break it down and to chew it up and cut it up. Those discs really cut up debris pretty well. Right. And then he brought in the harrows, and that's to help just level it all. So we did the harrows, and then of course we brought in the drill and we planted.
Yeah, yep.
So.
And that triticale crop did really, really well. We put that in. That would have been like an October type seeding, so a fall seeded deal. And then it came the next spring, did really well. We ended up only watering it the one time, but it yielded excellent for us, had really good tonnage. And then what we were looking towards at that point, so we'd have harvested, I don't know, maybe July-ish, somewhere in that type time frame. And then the thought was that we would work it one more time and potentially seed right to pasture that fall. But even sitting in my office, which is right here, looking at the field that was right there, I saw we started having green things coming, just weeds, But like a real genius, I never went down in to keep an eye on how tall they were getting or how fast. And they got way tall, way fast. And that was on me for not watching it. And I could have sprayed, given that we're not necessarily organic producers myself on this property. But I didn't do that, nor did I control them with any kind of mechanical means. So I guess walk me through that in that sense. As far as weed control, what would some options be or some approaches be? Or what would you do if you were trying to say, hey, it's midsummer, so it's peak heat, so we don't want to seed, but we do need weed control so that we can seed in the fall? Because what happened to me due to my mismanagement is that I let the weeds get away from me. They got so tall and out of control, fall seeding was no longer an option, so we just had to work everything under and wait for this upcoming spring. What would some options have been had I been more on top of it in controlling those weeds to prepare for fall seeding?
Yeah, well, you mentioned it. The first option for you would have been to use an herbicide and to control it that way. For me, I would have went and dissed it probably a couple times throughout the summer, because it is, you're right, it's amazing how fast those weeds come up.
I could not believe how quick they got away from me. I looked one way and chased my kids. I looked back the other, and I had like 6 foot tall weeds. Yeah.
And then by then we're starting from ground one, ground zero. You're dealing with the volume of debris that's on top, which isn't good. And that's why we kind of made the decision that we did last fall. Yeah. Just let's wait again, and we dissed it in, and so it looks good. And it's amazing how much stuff will break down over the course of a winter.
Right, yeah.
And so, I mean, I'm looking at it right now, and it doesn't look that bad.
Yeah, no, it's I think it's going to work. I mean, we'll need to work it again to prep the seed bed in the spring, but yeah, I've been really pleased with where it's at for the winter, given the amount of debris that was on top prior to coming and working it in with the disc. So looking at this piece that's right below us as a case study, and what we'll do next from here. So we've actually taken it. It was disc last fall, I believe, is what Dale ran over it, and then those weeds have decomposed underneath there. And then we've actually ended up feeding cattle on it. just because it didn't have anything seeded, so there wasn't anything to interrupt there. What would be the next steps between here and then seeding, first year management, prior to it being kind of an established usable pasture?
So what I would recommend is this spring when things dry out, we come in and we'd most likely go through it with probably that high-speed disc again, you know, because some of these places where you've fed out over the winter, we want to get that mixed in and underneath as much as possible. We'd harrow it, and then we'd bring out our drill, and we'd, you know, whatever variety of seeds you choose, we would come and plant it. And the nice thing about spring is it seems to be, usually there's more consistent rain in the spring. At least we hope we can count on it. So in between rainstorms, the key or the best case scenario would be to plant it right ahead of a nice storm that dumps an inch. And then you got, 2, 3, 4 days, depending on what the weather's doing, before you might have to put some other irrigation on it, or get another storm. Best case is have 2 storms in a row, then that about cover you. But so we do that, we get it planted, and so what we normally do is to help offset things. Now again, I'm not that familiar with herbicides anymore. I mean, I'm talking 17 years since I've really done that. So I don't know if you could go and spray it for weed control, but what we do is we let it start coming up, and about, I don't know, probably July or so, we go and actually we swath it. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to get, you get it up about 15 inches tall, and you're thinking, and there's going to be some weeds in there, because there always is. Right. But you get it that tall, and you're thinking, oh man, look at all this feed, and you do not want to put your cows out there, because those roots are so tender, and the soil's not compacted yet, and so your cows will just rip. Not all of it obviously, but you'll have a percentage of it gone because of the cows being excited, getting out there and just going after. And even them just chewing and grabbing a hold of the plant, they'll be ripping some of it out. So you don't want to do that. You want to let that crop get established. So we always take it, and of course there's weeds in it, so we take it and we mow it down with a swather, and then we chop it, and I just compost it. Some people call me crazy. We do a lot of composting, so we need green material to mix in, and so it just works out great. We do that with our pasture and our first crop hay as well.
Okay.
Our new stands.
Right. Yep.
Can you count to 5?
Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Nope, 3, 5.
No, 3, 4, 5.
No, 3, 5.
No, 3, 4, 5.
No, 3, 5.
No, 3, 4, 5.
3, 5 is when the auction is. 3, 4, 5 are numbers. Do you know how people get to the auction? They have to get online and go to gotanycows.com. By when?
By 3, 5.
By 3, 5. Great.
So if you were backing up to the seed selection spot, you'd mentioned a little earlier the importance of legumes mixed in with grasses. Walk us through a little bit of what that does and how that works as far as fixing nitrogen and why you use the legumes you do and why you use the grasses you do. Because this is the spot where, everyone you talk to has got a different opinion on this versus that, or the other versus this, or this is great, that's terrible. What do you use and why, even though there'd be a broad variety of opinions on the subject?
There is a big variety, a wide range of opinions on this. So obviously we're in a different area than you. We're dairy, and so we want our cows to really produce a lot of milk off of the pasture grass. So the legumes, they help out. Number one, they're a nitrogen fixing plant. So they will actually make nitrogen, and it's in the soil that your grasses can grow, because your hay doesn't need the nitrogen, but your grasses do. They need nitrogen. And so by having a legume in there, number one, it's helping your grasses grow better because they can attach to that nitrogen and use it. Secondly, the grasses that we use, like, you might want a different plant than what we use as far as grasses. You might want more fescue. I use a limited amount of fescue. I found over the years that my cows don't eat it as well.
Sure, not quite as palatable. Yep.
Right, and things are improving. There's new generations of fescue now. There's a lot of it's called soft fescue, and there's new generations coming out all the time that people are claiming or the cows will eat a lot better, the dairy cows.
Right.
So. But I'm still a little leery. The last few pastures I put in, we might put in about 5% fescue is all. It's not a high percentage. We put in more perennial rye.
Yep. Yep.
We put in some annual rye. We put in the Timothy, the orchard grass. What else? I've talked about the fescue.
Yeah.
I know there's a couple others, but I can't think of them right now.
You're good. A couple quick questions for you there. So on the fescue, I mean, we're talking about basically the trade-off between tonnage or productivity and palatability. Is the fescue one of your more productive? I mean, fescue is all there is in a lot of parts of the world. You know, out into Kentucky and a good swath of the South there'd be a lot of fescue. But do you see that as a common trade-off in varieties? Kind of more tonnage, less palatable, or what do you see like with your ryegrasses relative to your I'm losing the word, fescue, relative to fescue as far as productivity versus palatability?
Well, it depends on the type or the time of year. Okay. So your ryegrasses are going to do really good in the spring when it's cool, and they'll come up and they'll be the first ones to really take off. And I don't care the cow, your cows are going to want to eat that first. Right. We've done some studies with the university, or with Utah State University, and they've done studies where they've stripped, different type of varieties, and I mean, hands down, your ryegrasses are what the cows prefer. Right. But the problem is ryegrasses don't grow in July, July and August, but your fescues do. So obviously you need something. So that's another reason why we do mixes is just to help offset when there's peaks. Peaks for one grass is not a peak for another, and so on and so forth. So we have found that the first covering, maybe the second, because what we do is in our system we do intensive grazing. And so we go and we'll let our dairy cows be on a paddock for 12 hours, and then they're on a new paddock, and we just go around.
You're rotating twice a day as you milk.
Correct. Yep. And so by that second time around, we found the cows will do really well. Our dairy cows will do really well on that fescue. Yep. But by midsummer, and they'll eat it midsummer, but it starts growing and it starts laying down. Right. And so where I think I've seen beef cows will do pretty well on that stuff. And so by and large, I've heard from the experts, they recommend more of a fescue mix, especially if it's going to be beef cows.
So you mentioned orchard grass and Timothy. Would those be more taken off in sync with the ryegrass, or do either one of those go? I don't even know for sure. Are those warm season or cool season grasses?
Well, I think they would be. I don't really even know the answer to that. I know they grow well throughout the whole year. Yeah, and that's why I like them. Some people don't like them, but I do, just because they'll jump right back up. And then I've noticed that my cows eat it. Yeah, right. And so I just kind of go with what my cows eat.
Yeah, well, that's one of those things, and I apologize to jump right in there, but I think that's one of the reasons I most value your insight when it comes to these things. Because even like as I work with my dad, and who does all of our hay production, and my dad knows tons and tons about crops. That's what he does all day, every day. He's a crop advisor for other farms, and then he runs his own farm. But he's working specifically with crops, and there is a distinction there. And my dad would tell you the same thing if he's sitting right here with us. He'd say, there's a distinction between just looking at it from an agronomic perspective, as far as just what works for the crops and what works for the cows, because you are seeding the grasses for the cows to eat. And I think that provides a unique perspective in that sense, that you're working with both sides of the coin, both the plant and the animal that consumes it. On your legume selection, what makes you go with the legumes you go with? What do you like about them, and or what makes you select them over other available options?
Well, I don't know. I don't know of a lot of other options than what we've already discussed. There's the three. Obviously, you got your clovers, the red and white, and then the bird's foot trefoil. I didn't know anything about bird's foot trefoil until Utah State called me one day, and they wanted to do a study. Okay. And so, and the biggest advantage, other than the nitrogen fixing, is the bird's foot trefoil is they produce a tannin. The cows won't bloat on them. Right.
So it's safe for them to eat. Yeah.
Correct. And so it's safe, whereas I have had some cows bloat on the clovers and some alfalfa type stuff, because I'm not afraid to put even a little bit of alfalfa in my mix as well. Sure. But I will say your cows have to adapt to it. Yeah. You can't just go and throw them out day one and put them out there for 8 hours and expect to not have any damage done to your animal. They'll bloat. Right. So in the springtime, we always just kind of slow them into it. We'll take them out. We'll let them go eat from the bunk, and then we'll let them go out for 2-3 hours, and then the next day it might be 3 hours, 3 to 4, and then we take about a week before we get them out there for the entire day, just to get them adjusted and used to it. But back to the clovers, it's just been kind of trial and error, and I do like the bird's foot trefoil, and so and the cows like it. But they also like the clover. I mean, the cows like any kind of legume, and the legumes do well in the heat. Right. They just picture it like alfalfa. A lot of it's just like alfalfa, and it does really well.
Right. So with the only other legume I've even heard of, and you may or may not have any firsthand experience with it, I've heard of like a Rocky Mountain sandfoin. I have no idea what it is. I've never used it. Do you have any knowledge of it, of what that
I've heard of it, but I haven't used it.
No firsthand on that.
There's some things that, and I don't know, it's a different plant, but there's some things that I have to be careful, and they freely admit, being organic, that if it gets out of control, you can't control it without herbicide. And so there's some things that I am scared to try, because I don't want
it to take off, get out of control, and go somewhere you don't want it. That makes sense. So on alfalfa relative to bird's foot trefoil, how much alfalfa would you dare have in a mix, and would you ever use it in place of the clover and or the trefoil, or would you only ever do it in addition to those other legumes?
I would probably do it in addition to. I'm definitely not afraid of it, but it'd be just a couple pounds. It wouldn't be very much at all. Yeah.
So when you look at all of these pastures that you've established, because like I mentioned, they are, if you drive around in June, like I want people to look at your pastures, not mine. Like, oh yeah, this is really pretty, it's really nice. But hopefully this will be the same way once we get it all the way up and put together. And like you mentioned, give it kind of a year or so to establish. And we'll kind of just treat it like a field of hay, probably for a year, and do about like you've mentioned there, probably just swath it and or spray it if we needed to, but just try to stay ahead of the weeds, and then try to be really light in our use. Because I think, like you mentioned, it's easy. I think it's two different things as I watch other people establish pasture. Number one is either you get way too excited and you ruin it with your cows, or number two, it comes up and it's just a weed patch, and you just assume, oh, it's no good, you know what I mean, or something was wrong about whatever, something was wrong about the seed or how we put it in or whatever else, and they don't give it time, you know what I mean, to establish and become what it could be. If you're looking back through all the pastures you've established, Greg, what would be, I guess, some of your biggest disappointments, whether that's in seed selection and or how you prepped it and or how you managed it for the first year after it was seeded?
So everything I pointed out is from lessons learned. So
Trial by fire,
so
right.
the first disappointment we had was our first seed selection and the first pasture we ever did. And it was just that most of it was fescue, and we just found out real quick that the cows just don't eat it. Especially
just too much fescue for your
by
application.
August they just weren't eating it. Secondly was putting cows out there too quick and overgrazing. And part of it was that we just didn't have enough pasture established. It wasn't, I knew you're not supposed to overgraze, of course, but when you're required to feed your cows so much and you're trying to do what's right, you're like, well, I got to have them out there, but you might not have the pasture necessary to do it. For that, we're waiting for that next year for that next, 10 acres to come online. So that, I will say, let me add something to what you're just talking about. The one thing I will say is I've had a couple experiences where, we thought that, okay, we're going to have to just dig it out. And we come out and we're looking, it was a fall seeding. And, of course, you can barely tell them, coming up in the fall. But in the springtime, we're coming up. And, of course, there's some weeds coming up, but we're looking, and I thought it was just a complete failure. And so I said, let's give it a little bit more time, because we thought we could see just some little finger-like hairs coming out. And you don't know if it's June grass. You don't know exactly what it is. At least I don't. I'm not an expert.
Sure, me either.
But anyways, I thought, hey, let's just give it a little bit more time. And sure enough, by midsummer, we're like, hey, we've got to stand here. So what could have been we could have just ripped it out because we didn't think anything was there. We gave it a little bit more time, and voila, there it was.
Right. So when you're looking at a pasture, you've got it seeded, you've got it coming, you've kept it wet, you've kept cows off of it so it's not torn out. At what point would you call it and say, hey, this one, for whatever reason, something didn't turn out here, and we need to call this a loss, dig it out or spray it out and start over? At what point do you make that call?
I would say, if you give it a year and you have big open spaces, because there's going to be some parts of grass that will just naturally fill in. You know, it's going to stool out. But if you have big open spaces, you know, maybe do the rule of thumb. If you can't see, if you take a square out there, and if there's only 1 or 2 plants, 3 plants in that square, then maybe we ought to, yeah. But you'll know. It's kind of obvious that if you're just like looking around and thinking, I can't get anything off this. If you're going to swath it and the volume's way down, you know, then probably ought to consider redoing it. Either that or even just planting back into it. But I haven't had that much experience. I found it's probably just better to restart over.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, I really appreciate it, and I am looking forward to. I very much appreciate the progress we've already made on this piece, taking it from it was rough and it was tough and it had all sorts of bunch grasses that were no good in it, and you know, we've gotten it cleaned up and gotten a good crop of triticale. I've learned what not to do on weed management on my end, and I am looking forward to this next year of turning that into a productive pasture. Hopefully one that can be like unto yours. I sure appreciate all the help you've given us and working with us with your equipment and things like that. Has been very gracious to work with us that way. Is there anything else you'd throw in for anybody that's in that same scenario as what I am and is kind of learning as they go how to get that pasture established? Anything else you'd like to throw in on either pasture and or just a new cattleman? Words to them.
The biggest thing that I would recommend is find someone in your area that has done it, just like kind of like you're talking about. Find someone, a friend, a neighbor, and talk to them. Pick their brain and just because every area is going to be different.
Right.
And so what might work here might not work, you know, down in southern Utah, you know, or northern Idaho, you know, and so just find someone local that's had success and, you know, find out from them, talk to them and get their opinion, their advice, because they know and they can help you out. And that's the other thing is I found that I haven't found another farmer in your trade or cattleman or whatever that's not willing to talk to someone and help someone out.
Right. Absolutely. No, we're fortunate to work in the industry we do and with the people we do, and really appreciate your help to me personally and to all the other people listening to the podcast. And thanks so much for taking the time to record with me today, Greg.
You bet. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Got Any Cows podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts, and visit us anytime at gotanycows.com.